Hello, this is Seymour Rocks reporting from Down Under. Um, I received what I considered to be a very rude comment to one of my videos, which is this. So first, people like you and Hal Turner said this was killing millions. Then you offer no retraction, and then you completely change your story. Oh, but something liberals. Well, that's pretty dumb. Um, I'm certainly not going to recant, but it has led me to go over some of the material of the last 3 months and to work out just how things have evolved during that time. It's not in my nature, at least in this stage of my life, to have set views on things. Rather, I try to assess things and reassess them according to new information that comes my way. It's not in my nature to jump on bandwagons or attach myself to particular pundits and go with everything they say. And of late, I've become particularly averse to angry views that are based on a particular ideology and not always fact-based, in fact, very rarely, especially in comment sections. I have never in my whole life accepted a top-down official viewpoint on things, especially when that comes without any real evidence that stands up to scrutiny, and never more so than today. In this particular incident, I accepted a lot of the early information that we had about this novel coronavirus. From the onset, as soon as I heard the evidence from Francis Boyle and others, I had accepted pretty much that this was a dangerous bioweapon that came out of Wuhan, China, whether by design or more probably accidentally. However, when this spread to Europe and then the United States, I expected that the consequences would be devastating, as they have been indeed to the economy and to the whole fabric of life. However, as bad as it has been for those affected in hospitals and nursing homes, the numbers of deaths have not come anywhere close to what I had expected, let alone to the projections of the likes of Neil Ferguson of Imperial College and Tony Fauci. When I was in lockdown with my partner Pam for 4 weeks, well actually 6 weeks, we watched a 9-part series on vaccination that was very, very good, and it took me back to some of my roots, because I worked for 10 years as an acupuncturist, and it made me reconsider some of this early information in the light of this new information. So since then, I've heard information from Dr. Rashid Buttar and Judy Mikovits that has persuaded me that it's not so much a plague as a pandemic of corruption. At the very least, it's not what we're being told. However, none of this is set in stone, and I'm open to persuasion, especially by events, unfolding events, as they may unfold in the coming months or even years. I've been going through my archives fairly laboriously, as best I can, and I intend to set out how this has evolved since January, which is when I first learned about the novel coronavirus, although I know that the history goes back further than that. Much of this material relates to New Zealand, so I'm juxtaposing that with the statements of the World Health Organization and the changing party line there. And partially, this is because this is where I live, and secondly, because New Zealand has been held up to the world as some sort of example to be followed. So join me as we take a brief look at the history of the last 3 months and why I have come to the conclusion that this is more of a plague of corruption, or even what has been described recently as a pandemic rather than a true pandemic. Okay, so I just want to start. I want to start with January and February, first of all. So this is from the 14th of February. This is before I learned about the coronavirus. So this is from the World Health Organization on the 14th of January. Preliminary investigations conducted by the Chinese authorities have found no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission of the novel coronavirus identified in Wuhan, China. And then this was the first I heard about it. This was from Hal Turner, Trapped. China locks down a city of Wuhan over virus, police blocking all roads in and out. And if you can remember back to then, it allowed time, presumably, for 5 million Chinese to leave Wuhan and to spread this around China and presumably around the world. At this stage, Turner was saying his sources were saying that millions of people would die from this in China. Okay, and then this is the 27th of January. Some of these might be a wee bit out of sync. It's been a really hard job putting this together. So this is from New Zealand. Coronavirus outbreak. Chinese tourists on the same flight as person with deadly illness arrive in New Zealand. A group of Chinese tourists who were on the same flight as a person with the deadly coronavirus have arrived in New Zealand. And then this was from Hal Turner, but he's quoting scientific literature. He's not coming out with it. He said a medical study of the virus outbreak, 83% infection rate and 15% mortality. Get right with God. And then at the end of January, Great Game India came out with this coronavirus bioweapon, how China stole coronavirus from Canada and weaponized it. Last year, a mysterious shipment was caught smuggling coronavirus from Canada. It was traced to Chinese agents working at a Canadian lab. Subsequent investigation by Great Game India linked the agents to the Chinese biological warfare program, from where the virus is suspected to have linked causing the Wuhan coronavirus outbreak. And this was the thing that got Zero Hedge kicked off permanently from Twitter. It was from BuzzFeed. A pro-Trump blog doxed a Chinese scientist it falsely accused of creating the coronavirus as a bioweapon. The scientist's name, photo, email, and the telephone number are being spread across American social media. And here we are. On February the 1st, Zero Hedge permanently suspended from Twitter for harassment. And this is the an article from the 2nd of January, 1st of February. Coronavirus contains HIV insertions, stoking fears over artificially created bioweapons. And of course, about this time, the information came out about the HIV inserts into the genetic material, and this came out, and this almost as soon as it came out, the paper was retracted. And then we have this, so we must never forget this. The WHO chief, Dr. Tedros, says widespread travel bans are not needed to beat the China virus. Notice that previously they were saying the There's no human-to-human transmission. That was back in January. So here, the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, said on Monday there was no need for measures that unnecessarily interfere with international travel and trade in trying to halt the spread of a coronavirus that has killed 361 people in China. So just put that into your memory and don't forget it. And then about this time, this is the 3rd of February, this is when we first heard from Dr. Francis Boyle. Dr. Francis Boyle, creator of Bioweapons Act, says coronavirus is a biological warfare weapon. In an explosive interview, Dr. Francis Boyle, who drafted the Biological Weapons Act, has given a detailed statement admitting that the 2019 coronavirus is an effective biological warfare weapon and that the World Health Organization already knows about it. And then going back to the World Health Organization, they're sort of gradually changing their narrative, and they say, having denied the whole thing, they said a window of opportunity to act, World Health Organization says. And then this is about the same time. I haven't got the date with me, but we're basically at a pandemic now. Mayo Clinic physician on coronavirus. So this is the first talk about a pandemic, and it was some, days or weeks before the WHO acted. And then, at about this time, we started to hear True News has been doing some very good coverage. Coronavirus, thousands more cruise passengers might have been exposed to deadly infection. And then on the 10th of February, coronavirus cases spreading outside China could be the spark that becomes bigger fire, WHO says. WHO officials are now concerned about new coronavirus cases in France and the UK that were transmitted without any travel history to China. The detection of the small number of cases could be the spark that becomes the bigger fire, but for now it's only a spark. So in other words, it's got nothing to do with China. And then at this time, an advanced team of WHO experts arrives in China to probe the coronavirus, says Dr. Tedros. And this was a red letter day, so fix this in your thing, because I think this is the oh no, sorry, it's not. This is just calling it by a different name. The World Health Organization names the new coronavirus COVID-19. It stands for corona. CO stands for corona, the VI for virus, and the D for disease. WHO officials wanted a name that doesn't refer to a geographical location, animals, an individual, or a group of people. In other words, they wanted to defend their Chinese friends. And this is the first kind of sign of action from the New Zealand government. Flights from China, still landing in New Zealand despite coronavirus travel ban. Flights from mainland China are continuing to land at New Zealand airports on the day a ban on all foreign travellers arriving from the country goes into effect. The government announced the travel ban on Sunday as part of a fight against the deadly coronavirus outbreak, which has killed over 300 people in China. Air New Zealand has suspended all flights between Shanghai and Auckland, but 3 China-based airlines are continuing to fly into New Zealand. And this was the first mention of broken supply chains. I wrote an article here, empty shelves, coronavirus shortages could hit stores by April. This was an article by myself. And Yeah, I'm not quite sure what this is all about. Well, I know what it's about. And then towards the end of February, the first mention of Iran. Iran shuts schools, cultural centres as coronavirus kills 6. Coronaviruses in Iran count for the most in any country outside China. And this is an article I did about stuff that was happening. At this stage, what I was seeing is just that the authorities in New Zealand were just letting the virus in on cruise liners, on planes. So this is, I'll just read the first few paragraphs. Yesterday, I did very little, but did a spa with a woman from Auckland, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, when I pushed her further, she said she has a son working for the Auckland Hospital Board who has been attending meetings on this. Given the strictness around patient confidentiality, I wonder how acceptable it is for a health worker to be sharing what is said in the boardroom to one's mother. I've said on numerous occasions that it looks less and less like we're living in a democratic country, and I've had some experience with the Soviet Union. I know when people no longer trust their government or media, they resort to two things: reading between the lines and rumours. Is that where we are in New Zealand in 2020? So that's, I was already saying this back in February. And yeah, we just had various things. Witness shocked after watching St. John's staff in hazmat suits help 3 people into an ambulance. And of course, this was reported, but officially it had nothing to do with COVID-19. So I was getting very, very alarmed at this time that the official figures were just lies, and they weren't taking into account community transmission. So 5, and this is what they said was fake news. 5 New Zealanders and 1 Chinese have tested positive for coronavirus in Wellington, New Zealand, authorities have said in a statement. This marked the first confirmed coronavirus cases in New Zealand. According to the statement, 5 people became ill and coming into a contact with a Chinese colleague who was visiting from Shanghai and had recently been in Wuhan, the epicenter of the outbreak. Now, of course, this was immediately kind of denounced as fake news. And this was the first mention of the economy. This is from the end of February. New Zealand economy faces, I can't see what I'm reading. Economic impact from coronavirus outbreak. Finance Minister Grant Robertson warns of short-term hit as disruption to tourism, logging and agriculture grows. Ha, ha, ha. And then this was a red letter day, because up till then, it was all kind of, we don't have any cases in New Zealand and we don't need to worry about this. So on the 28th of February, New Zealand confirms case of COVID-19 coronavirus. The person who has been confirmed to have New Zealand's first case of COVID-19 followed all the steps you would hope would be followed. And that was actually an Iranian chap who just came back from Iran who did all the right things, as opposed to some of the other people who followed. So here we are again. Yeah, the first case of COVID-19 coronavirus. And on the same day, coronavirus, global stock markets suffer 6th day of losses. New Zealand share market opened lower on Friday, following a 6th day of world market losses as investors respond to the economic threat of coronavirus. And of course, since then, the stock market is kind of, up and down, and they don't even seem to mind all the bad news, say about food shortages and everything else. It doesn't seem to have any effect on what's happening on Wall Street. Now this was, sorry, this is going back to what I showed you before. Without foundation. Warning, after fake news article says 6 corona cases in Wellington. Well, we'll never really know whether that was true or not. We just have to believe the authorities, don't we? And then at the end of February, coronavirus queues at supermarkets as panic buying ramps up. And of course, the first thing to go was toilet paper, and then flour, and a lot of other things because of disruption to the supply chains. But of course, they just pointed to it as panic buying. It was nothing to do with supply chain problems or crop failures or anything else. And New Zealand moving into next phase with the first positive COVID-19 coronavirus. So going into a new sort of strategy, which was to destroy the virus. And yeah, so that's it. So there's a lot of information there. It's taken longer than I thought. So I'm going to spread this over 2 videos and have the information or the timeline for March, April, and the first part of May in a separate video. So I hope you'll go to that, and then at some stage I'll be making my own kind of summation and doing some of my own analysis in a formal video, but that might be several days. So anyway, please go to the second video now. Okay, I would like to move on to part 2 of my timeline, which picks up the picture from March going through April and early May, and this shows the changing agenda from those early days. So, okay, so yeah, we're into March now, but I'm just going to show this one thing from February. Yeah, while everyone was criticizing Donald Trump and he was truly in denial, what about Nancy Pelosi? Nancy Pelosi visited China's Chinatown, and she's saying something quite different from Donald Trump. She's saying, you know, all of this stuff. She was echoing the World Health Organization, saying, don't be don't be racist. Come down to Chinatown, hug a Chinese person. So if that wasn't it wasn't denial, I don't know what was. So we just got to see this in that context. Trump administration officials do not get prepared, don't buy masks, food, cleaning supplies or anything. Just wait for a vaccine and do what you're told. So so you've got these two narratives, and they were both fake on either side. So much for being, you know, partisan, eh? So this is on the 3rd of March from the World Health Organization. Stigma can drive people away from seeking help by getting screened, tested, and quarantined. When talking about COVID-19, certain words and language may have a negative meaning for people and fuel stigmatizing attitudes. So don't even kind of suggest that the virus came out of Wuhan. I mean, we've got the Spanish flu, we've got the Hong Kong flu, but we can't have the Wuhan or the flu. And then about this time, True News revealed this. They were asking the question whether the Vice President was possibly exposed to coronavirus in Florida, and there was a lot of stuff, very interesting stuff that was coming out about APEC and CPAC and people who may have been exposed there. So it really just sort of came to nothing. It was a right question at the right time. And then I wrote this article in early March, and I said in New Zealand the authorities are trying to quarantine information and not the coronavirus. So I said just a few days ago our Prime Minister was complacently saying there was no coronavirus cases in New Zealand. My partner Pam caught the interview on the radio. I didn't. And then there was 1, then 2, and now there's 4 cases. And we know that there are more, but we will be drip fed the information while it gets worse. And then there's this, I'm not concerned at all. Donald Trump dismisses fears coronavirus is close to the White House after CPAC attendee tested positive, and the first Washington, D.C. case was confirmed while at dinner with Brazilian President Bolsonaro. And then Italy, this is the 8th of March, Italy to lock down Milan region in bid to contain coronavirus outbreak. Measures include a virtual ban on entry or exit from Lombardy, and several other northern areas are to be targeted in draft decree. And then, so now this was interesting because nowadays when I go on to any New Zealand media, all they can talk about, that's the only thing that they talk about. Everything else is on hold. All they can talk about is COVID-19, COVID-19, COVID-19. But back in on the 8th of March, what were they talking about? They were talking about anything else, but there was just one item here on coronavirus as a quarantine hotel collapsed. But apart from that, absolute silence. And then on the 7th of March, coronavirus, 43 hospital staff among Kiwi cases, close contact, self-isolating. So it was all about, the mantra then was self-quarantine. So if you were on a cruise ship, you self-quarantined and it wasn't police. If you arrived back in New Zealand from China or Iran or Italy or anywhere, you self-quarantine, and of course it wasn't policed. So that was back in March, so just as a reminder. And then we had our third case of coronavirus confirmed in New Zealand. That's from the 5th of March. So, you know, March was kind of end of February, beginning of March is when we first got our first cases. Jacinda Ardern reveals unprecedented travel restrictions to combat coronavirus. All travellers to New Zealand to self-isolate. So again, it was self-isolate. There was no policing. People just kind of observed self-isolation if they felt like it. Nobody really bothered to check up if they were actually doing so. And here we are, everyone travelling to New Zealand from overseas to self-isolate. So until now, foreign travellers arriving from mainland China and Iran have been banned from entering the countries. Travellers from South Korea and Italy have been asked to self-isolate for 2 weeks on arrival. And but the cruise ship saga continued, and I remember going down. We could clearly see the cruise ship, you know, in Wellington Port. There were numerous cases, but in this, the cruise ends abruptly. Passengers let loose in Wellington, and that was on the 16th of March. So we don't know. I think it was the cruise liners just doing their own thing, but of course nothing was policed. And then we've got this from a few days later. Chinese state media initially called it the Wuhan virus. Now China says that's racist. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization won't call the coronavirus by its name, SARS-CoV-2 or CoV-2, which some Chinese scientist says hurts social stability. And here we are. This is just another. This is a report. Passengers kicked off cruise ship. They're just let loose in Wellington, presumably by the, by the people on the cruise ship. And then a gradual sort of tightening up, a sort of semi-demi tightening. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announces New Zealand border closure to non-residents. And of course, what happened? Well, when we got to the lockdown, there were a whole lot of foreign tourists who were stranded in New Zealand, and it was a real mess. So all of New Zealand's borders were closed to non-residents in an attempt to stop the spread of COVID-19. Only New Zealand citizens or permanent residents and their families will be able to enter the country from 11:59 p.m. on Thursday. She announced the decision on Thursday evening, saying it follows a number of tourists refusing to isolate. I'm becoming increasingly concerned visitors to New Zealand are not adequately self-isolating or refusing not to, and that is an unacceptable risk that we must end, she told media. The law also extends to the Pacific Islands. So people from the Pacific were exempt from the previous rule of mandatory self-isolation for 14 days upon entering New Zealand. Now she extended it. And then I think on the same day, they announced that testing for virus was rolling out across New Zealand. And of course, there's always that question of what the nature of the testing was. I never got a response. The only explanation of what a COVID-19 test involves comes from the naysayers, from the contrarians. So what am I supposed to do with that? we're just blithely told, you know, that people are being tested, but what are they being tested for? That is the question. And then this is on the 15th of March, Jacinda Ardern announces the toughest border restrictions in the world. Well, yeah, that's a load of bollocks. And then this was, I haven't got the date for this, New Zealand government announces a transition to level 4 national lockdown, and that's when we all had to stay in our houses. We were allowed to go for one walk a day within, you know, just in the immediate environs of our own home. You weren't allowed to go to the beach or the bush or anything. So yeah. And then it was getting pretty much like a police state. So I got this following as a rumour, but it does not mean it's false. I got told today that Whenuapai Air Base near Auckland are full of soldiers, and they plan to block the Bombay's Auckland Tunnel and block the north. All Aucklanders will be locked in, so if you need to leave today. So I've got no idea. I've never been able to confirm any of this, but what did appear in the media was this headline: coronavirus, police can now enter homes to look for people gathering. And okay, so moving into April, we have this. This was an article that I picked up off RT. It was an opinion piece by a journalist and a lawyer working in New Zealand, and he was asking the question: New Zealand becoming police state, COVID-19 lockdown to be taken seriously, but reporting neighbours and abuse of power goes too far. And then I wrote my own thing. I wrote a compendium of stories pointing towards the move towards a totalitarian police state. And then I started off by saying, look at this graph and contrast the Asian countries with Western nations. We don't know that Japan, Singapore, Taiwan, etc. didn't have a milder strain of the virus, but it seems to indicate that they had something right in their response. So you've got all these countries. This was when everyone is coming out and oh no, this is slightly different. So yeah, this shows all these other countries that are doing really badly, and then you have the Asian countries that are doing better. And I don't know if Taiwan is here. Taiwan is the country that seemed to be doing the best. And this came out the beginning of April. I had an exchange with Stacey Herbert of the Max Kaiser show. And this was the shops in I think Berlin. So it just shows the shortages kicking in. And then I wrote something. I said, New Zealand economy at Great Depression levels. GPs, that's general practitioners or MDs, laid off. So retired GPs and nurses could be called back to work in possible coronavirus pandemic. The Ministry of Health says. Well, I was wondering if that is actually happening. This comes after 54 hospital staff in New Zealand were asked to go into self-isolation after treating a probable case of COVID-19. And then about this time, I started to look at what I called contrarian views, and this was Del Bigtree. I started watching him, and then shortly after this, I watched with my partner Pam a 9-part documentary on vaccination, and that made all the difference to the way in which I began seeing things. And one of the things that, of course, has been discussed and suppressed is any relationship to 5G. But here goes a notice saying New Zealand to launch 5G network at an event in Wellington on Tuesday. Vodafone New Zealand switched on 5G in parts of the capital, as well as Auckland, Christchurch and Queenstown. So Vodafone New Zealand launched the wireless service in partnership with Nokia in parts of Wellington, Auckland, Christchurch and Queenstown on Tuesday morning. So there goes the confirmation. And then that was about the same time as a New York doctor came out, and he described the effects of 60 gigahertz on patients. It was censored immediately, but he was saying, really, he was just kind of wondering aloud. He said he's seeing really strange things that are happening, and that his patients looked more as though they had lungs more as if they were on the top of Mount Everest or were in a plane that was depressurizing. So, of course, you couldn't have any discussion of that. And it was about this time that we had David Icke and his 3 interviews. Of course, I disagreed, and I think I still disagree with him that there's no such thing as the virus. But he was starting to talk about things that I've since managed to confirm. One of the things is that death certificates are being changed to indicate deaths from COVID-19, and there's a lot of evidence for that, documentary evidence. And then this is when we started to get the backlash in America, and the crowd came out and demanded that the Michigan governor reopen the economy. And then there was this: COVID-19 coronavirus mutation threatens the race to develop a vaccine. I mean, that's really important stuff, because we keep on hearing just about every week that the vaccine is on the way. So we get contradictory information from the mass media. And then there's this German Bild newspaper accuses Beijing of exporting the coronavirus, and China's outraged after largest German newspaper accuses Beijing of exporting the coronavirus pandemic and demands 149 billion euros in damages. And then this strange thing. I think this sort of marked the turning around of some people in their approach to all of this, and it was a hot mic moment where a White House journalist said, "Well, we've all been vaccinated already." And I do have to wonder, when I look at the pictures of the press conferences in New Zealand Jacinda Ardern and her representatives. They're all standing next to each other. They're not wearing masks. There's no social distancing. This is the very time when we're under level 4 lockdown. What sort of a message was that giving to the New Zealand public when they were demanding that everyone keep social distancing? They couldn't even go for a solitary walk on the beach, and yet we see these people are not wearing masks and they're not keeping any sort of social distancing, and I have no idea whether the journalists at the conference were either. And then by the 28th of April, the 4 weeks of level 4 lockdown was over and coronavirus. So we're moving to level 3. What does that mean for you? And of course, now we're looking at moving to level 2. But of course, what level 2 means is a moving feast. I think that the government just makes up its mind on the day. And then this was from Hal Turner. He's talking about Anthony Fauci. You're fired, clean out your desk and get out. So that's April. Okay, so I just got a few slides left over. These are from May. So there's this from the other day from a Swedish expert who says that New Zealand faces years of quarantine, and in fact this is going to be going on in all countries for quite some time, and New Zealand or any other country is not exempt. It's a bit of reality. And then this is China asked the World Health Organization to delay pandemic announcement and to deny human transmission. That's from German intelligence, and I've just shown with this timeline that was so, but German intelligence has revealed that Chinese President Xi Jinping asked the World Health Organization Director Dr. Tedros, he's not Dr. Tedros, he's just Tedros, to cover up the severity of the coronavirus pandemic in January, according to Der Spiegel. During a January 21 conversation 1 week after the WHO assured the world there was no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission, she reportedly asked Tedros not to reveal that the virus was in fact transmissible between humans and to delay declaring that the coronavirus had become a pandemic, despite the virus qualifying as one by the WHO's own former guidelines. And of course, it's crystal clear that that was in fact the case. We don't really need Spiegel to say it, but I'm glad they are. And then Wuhan lab hack. There was a hack from the WHO, I think, and numerous organizations. Anyway, the Wuhan lab hack reveals unreported cases of COVID-19 cases, and there's evidence that records were deleted. So nearly 3 weeks ago, a cache of approximately 25,000 email addresses and records of organizations involved with COVID-19 were leaked, including the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the WHO, the US National Institute of Health, and the Gates Foundation. Today, the Weekend Australian reports that a data set obtained from the WIV using the hacked credentials suggests that the cases in China have been underreported. Unfortunately, I can't get direct access to that because the Australian is well and truly behind a paywall, which I'm not going to pay to breach. And then this is really current news. COVID-19 coronavirus, the Cabinet meets today to decide if New Zealand is ready for an alert level 2. And if they decide that we're ready for alert level 2, no doubt they will rewrite the rules from what they, the original announcement. And then, how could I not mention it? Just everything that has been coming out from anyone who has any sort of alternative point of view that opposes the World Health Organization is being censored by social media, and that, of course, includes this really good thing from Judy Mikovits, who has shown that there's a ticking time bomb in the form of retroviruses that have been spread to people via both contaminated blood and through vaccinations, mostly because they cultured the viruses in mouse tissue, and of course that has transferred over to humans. And she is maintaining that that is what's going to kill us and not COVID-19. So I think she's got pretty good credentials. Whether she's right or not, of course, we won't really know for some time. So yeah, so that's that. Okay, now for the difficult part. Bringing all this desperate and contradictory parts together to try and bring a more or less coherent narrative. I said in my video on this a week or so ago that I was perplexed or confused, and I didn't deal in certitudes. But this is clearly not good enough for some people who want ready-made answers, and there are none. So firstly, regarding China, some things are clear to me about China. Firstly, that many, many more people died in Wuhan than the official statistics are telling us, and that the Chinese are lying about this. What tells us this is the people collapsing on the streets, scenes from the hospitals, the crematoria working 24/7, spewing smoke into the air, and the missing 21 million cell phones. Apart from that, the statistics that are coming out of China make absolutely zero sense and one would have to be the most kind of blind pro-Chinese Communist Party person to believe them. So I have little doubt that this was a bioweapon that came out of a P4 biolab in Wuhan, and that the Gateses, the Faucis, etc., they were all involved in this gain of function research for on the coronavirus. And then there's the whole question of Event 201 and the military games in the Wuhan. So yeah, basically, if events in China are murky because of a lack of transparency and honesty from the Chinese Communist Party, they're even more murky now now that the disease has come to the West. So it was my expectation that the medical systems in the West would become quickly overwhelmed, and the early news seemed to bear that out. We heard terrible stories about Rest Home nursing home and just out of Seattle, and various other stories. However, as time went on, and just looking at things from a slightly different perspective, when I was open myself up to hearing the contrarian arguments, it became clear to me that the numbers succumbing to what came to be known as COVID-19 were nowhere near what I expected and what we were told would happen. So it seems to me that when both Neil Ferguson of Imperial College and Tony Fauci had put their reports in saying that there would be many hundreds of thousands, up to 1 million people killed in this virus on the desks of their respective leaders, and scared them into taking the course of action, then they rolled back the numbers in their computer models drastically. And Fauci even said something in a published paper that he has never said publicly, that COVID-19 might be nothing more than a bad case of the flu. So that's coming from the experts. But by this time, half the world is under some form of lockdown. As for the hospitals being overwhelmed, I'm sure that this is true in part, and hospital staff were being overwhelmed. And we've seen numerous examples of this, possibly in smaller hospitals, I don't know. I do know that some hospitals, at least, seem to be practically empty, and staff were either unemployed or sent home. And I was able to see this for myself at our local hospital when we did a drive around last weekend. Sorry, I'm just getting this. Okay, so so we went on a tour last Sunday of our local hospital on the last weekend of level 2 lockdown. So normally this hospital, even on a Sunday, would be really busy, and you'd be hard pressed to find a parking place. So as you can see from this photo, it's practically empty on the outside, and this is the main entrance. The main entrance was locked. One said go to the other door. So the first door was locked. It said go to the second door, and the second door was locked. And this was the sign that was on the entranceway. And you can't quite see it here, but it's absolutely deserted. There's nothing going on at all. So here we are, new visitors policy. No visitors unless in exceptional circumstances and by prior arrangement with the ward. No visitors under 16 years old. So this is a view of the main entrance. There would always be people kind of mulling around, and you can't quite see in the photograph, but I could see beyond those doors. That's the main vestibule, that's the main entrance to the hospital, the reception, etc. Absolutely dead. And then when I went around to the entrance to the emergency department, I came across this chap who's a security guard, and you had to get past him to get into the emergency department, and he very kindly let me take a photograph of him. So over this period, I can think that I think that only 1 or 2 at the most COVID patients have been treated at the hospital, while obviously there's practically nothing going on elsewhere and visitors are excluded. And of course there was no way that I could have got into the hospital to check this out. So there are so many things about this lockdown that just don't make sense to me. It makes perfect sense to me that vulnerable populations, if there's a major sort of outbreak, if there is indeed an epidemic, especially if it's a bloody bioweapon, it makes sense that vulnerable populations, especially the elderly, would be protected. But it doesn't seem to make so much sense, especially kind of as things have turned out, that the entire population should be locked down, essentially on house arrest, be denied the very things that would boost their immune systems and protect them from infection, sun, exercise, and human touch. So if people were dropping like flies, this course of action might be justified, and kind of at the beginning, this is what I expected might need to happen. But in this country, at least, it was nothing like what we were told it might be. And of course, now that I watched the numbers go up sort of exponentially, and then very, very quickly they went down, so that it was only 1 or 2 cases. And of course, that was all put down to the success of the lockdown, whereas maybe it's just an indication that the disease is not, either that it's not real, or perhaps that we have a less virulent version of this disease here. So the government spent a couple of months just letting people waltz into the country on planes, on cruise ships, etc. Well, those are the only ways into the country, actually, because New Zealand has a couple of islands far away from everyone else. So it would have been quite simple, in my mind, to just close the borders and keep the numbers down from the outset, and we wouldn't have been in this mess. And we would be like these countries, mostly in the third world, where even today there are no cases. So now we're being asked to congratulate the government, which allowed the whole thing to spread like wildfire, and it turned out to be a bit of a nothing anyway, and then congratulate them because they've managed to, to save us from this terrible fate. So I strongly suspect it was political and geopolitical considerations that stopped the government already wedded at the hip with globalist agendas and institutions, with the Gates Foundation and so on, with the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, and the list goes on. So the government obviously would not take any actions that went against the dictates of Dr. Tedros and the WHO, and they would certainly not do anything to upset the Chinese Communist Party. So on the one hand, we have a government that had to tread carefully so as not to upset its #1 trading partner, China, which has a stranglehold over just about every aspect of life in this country. It's also committed to the very worst aspects of the globalist New World agenda and everything that goes with it, and not least, of course, to the Five Eyes, of which we are a member. So New Zealand, this is taking a very kind of positive spin. What it has to do is to balance between China and America, with the complicating factor that of President Trump, against whom the deep state, the entirety of the international community, the media and so forth, is implacably opposed to. So there are so many aspects of this that could be talked about, but I come back to what I said in my introduction, that I now see this more as a plague of corruption, or a pandemic of corruption, than a pandemic or a plague. And I strongly suspect that we have an agenda driven by people such as Bill Gates and his minders to lock down entire populations and not free them from this until they have been vaccinated, made sick, or die due to the toxic ingredients in vaccines in combination with 5G. And I just watched an interesting video which posited the hypothesis, because it's unprovable, that perhaps the test kits are the new vaccine, and that's why they're so desperate now, when they weren't wanting to test anybody you know, a month and a half ago. Now everyone has to be tested. So why is that? So that was an interesting idea that I don't either subscribe or not subscribe to. So anyway, whatever's happening, it's no longer theoretical, but it's real, and it's happening at great speed. And that takes me into a whole new realm that I don't want to get into right now. I don't want to complicate things. But please, please take this just for what it is. And that's a reflection and an attempt to make sense of things. And above all, watch this space, watch my blog, watch very carefully what is happening. Things are moving very fast. And I have to tell you, I have no crystal ball, but I do have my suspicions and a huge sense of unease about this all. So this is Seymour Rocks reporting from down under.
Say you bout that action, huh? If the police asking, we don't know what happened, huh? Like qu'est-ce que c'est? Tell me that. Advantage. Bala make bad. Riding around with my 4Gs. We do not talk to the police. Can do fi wahman and no bill. So fake in the bugang and no key. Or end up on both knees, sucking long D on the damn streets. Fuck boys can't stand me, cause I'm way up like palm trees. Got that tank, boy, you know we bout to roll it up like whoa. All my homies stuntin' when we in the club like she got a big booty, told her bust it open. Out in Norway, just ballin' like Ginobili. I ain't 2 Chainz, but I in your bitch face, and that's true say. Feeling like Bobby Boucher, and giving a fuck what you say. The underdog, but I'm way better than you claim. These bars that I spit like running faster than Usain, yelling out 3 Camel. Fuck 112 if they come in here. No Crips, no Bloods, no guns in here. Swear down, you don't wanna front in here. Bergen City got lit this year. Shook the game, check the Richter scale. Leo hit me like remix, yeah. Had to get it like, switch it up. Ingen er kvikke min snakker. Dere er svanger som baker. Flowen er varmere enn satan. Jeg har en bitch, hun er vakker. Ganger hun hardt så det natter. Show me en slenger ut pakker som byttes mot lapper. Jeg tror ikke de fatter at byen er Bergen og jeg er Mufasa. De hadde ikke trodd sine ører, så jeg måtte få det på kamera. Ord til min kamera. De der er søt som bananer og ananas. Måten de sutter på ballene. Jeg er så skandinav, yeah. Det er fortsatt black og ble du tatt på sengen. Jeg kunne gjort det, men det er alt for enkelt. Det er ikke noen her som matcher meg på engelsk. Så fucking med meg, stikker under ned. Gå inn på alle sammen, BCG. Unge Malcolm har blitt tatt